It's nice to see everyone here. It's very lovely. So I'm Melissa from We Can Make. And a little shout out. Hands up who's been here from the very beginning of today. Woohoo! Who's come for just the afternoon? Ooh, we got like really good committed people. Nice. That's very good. A quick shout out to where we are at the moment. So, because it's kind of important where you kind of have these conversations. And I think it's really interesting. In this building, Knowle West Media Centre is interesting because it's a straw bale building built kind of 13, 14 years ago, which is kind of like, back then, that was really revolutionary. It's still pretty revolutionary now. And I think what was really interesting about that at the time, it was done as a community commission, as a group of young people who chose the architects and helped with design and did all of those things. And at the time, those young people were told, like, oh, don't bother with all of that. Just build it out of breeze blocks, and that's fine, that's good enough for you. And it was those young people that really pushed back against that and said, no, this community deserves more, it deserves better, and we want to create something here that can be a beacon and a glimmer of something that can be better and more possible, and that's what we want. And so that's kind of standing by your kind of principles and that drive and that mission to be better and to be, even if it's... Whoa, that was scary. Was that me? Is everyone all right? Everyone all right? No ears burst or anything? Okay, good. Everything was all right. Everyone's alive still. That's all good. So yeah, that was a little bit of the community power coming through there, saying, yes, this stuff really kind of matters. Listen. Yeah, definitely listen. And then I think, the other lesson about that is also about the power of small. We're a small community, small building, and all the rest of it. But, what we're about, and I think what everyone in this room about, is being about a system demonstrator that something better is possible. And if we collaborate together, then that is a really good thing. And I think what's interesting about the journey, even of itself, with the Retrofit Reimagined Festival, that's been a journey in itself as well. And each kind of host kind of community so far has kind of started in a bit of a different place, from Birmingham to the Building Centre in London, and now to kind of Knowle West. And I think it's a really kind of beautiful kind of thing that it keeps on growing and opening up kind of even more. And this is why I'm really excited about this kind of conversation, because I know it's going to even flow even more. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Immy.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And what an incredible day it's been so far. I mean, I'm sure you've seen all around you benches moving, lunch going, tables going all over the place, rooms transforming instantly. We've been into people's community gardens. We've been invited to hear the stories of so many amazing people. So because none of that is often like on the stage or recognised in the same way, there's a lot of people, amazing people behind the scenes, making today possible and welcoming us into Knowle West and into their neighbourhood with such love and care. So we give us a little round of applause and a moment of appreciation. And especially thank you to the Knowle West Media Centre and We Can Make teams for just the dream of a day. So I'm going to say that we're going to really settle in for a lovely kind of nearly 90 minutes now. So I would invite you to come forward. There is plenty of space. There's a sofa at the front. If you want to come and get comfortable, please do. And before I do my provocation, I'm going to pass the mic down and just get everyone to introduce themselves, say who they are for like 30 seconds. And then we're all going to actually, for this bit, talk at you for a little while. But I hope that most of you are feeling quite excited and ready for that, because we've had a really dynamic and busy day, beautifully curated by everyone mentioned before. So I'm Immy. I'm one of the co-founders of an organisation called Civic Square, which I'll talk a tiny bit about later on. And I'm one of the co-conspirators alongside 100 million different logos of just beautiful partners who've come together with nothing other than the real spirit to say, hey, I think we all need to be coming together in much more radical ways. And as a result of that, this festival has come together in all sorts of wonderful and DIY ways. So I'll pass over, and if everyone can just introduce themselves, say who you are, say, in whichever hat you want to tell us about, which Sara might actually struggle with. So you can have 60 seconds if you want.
Thanks, Immy. Hi, everyone. My name's Justin McGuirk. I'm the director of Future Observatory, which is the National Design Research Programme for the Green Transition. It's based at the Design Museum in London.
That was succinct. My name is Mellis Howard. I'm a director of a firm of architects called Archio, and we are, I sound like such an idiot, known for building social housing and community-led housing. And our expertise in community-led housing has brought us into this world of community-led retrofit and co-designing retrofit with communities. And I'm really excited to be working on the largest council estate in Europe. I'll tell you more about it. And I'm really inspired to be here today. I've been following these festivals and this work for a long time, so it's a real honour.
I won't take 60 seconds, I'll try and be quick. My name is Sara Edmonds. I am a co-director at the National Retrofit Hub with Rachel Owens down there as my co-director. I'm also co-founder of Home Energy Action Lab, and one of my co-founders, Sal, is down there as well. I work with Built Environment Smarter Transformation, and they're the people who brought you those little cut-out houses over there. It's the Innovation Centre for the Built Environment in Scotland. Was involved with ACAM, but basically I'm just really here with my whole heart because I just really believe in this as the transitional state that we're in to actually bring about the places that we so desperately all desire and need for a thriving future.
I'm Joe, and I'm actually incredibly humbled to be up on the stage here with all of you. I'm from Built by Nature, an organisation which is dedicated towards increasing the use of timber and bio-based materials. We're a non-profit. I'm actually an architect by background, but a kind of recovering architect. And I was with Sara in Architects Climate Action Network and Rachel and probably some others here actually as well. So yeah, no longer part of ACAM, but it's kind of close to my heart as well.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I mean, I hear this term, recovering architect, way too often, right? So there really needs to be some sort of kind of maybe therapy. I mean, we've got one in front of us as well. Maybe some kind of, we can go off into a side room if you guys need to join heads. But yeah, thank you so much, folks. I'm really delighted to be here and to like try and look after and bring out the best of this conversation. And imagine, those of you who know me well, I'm also responsible for keeping this sort of on time. So I might need a bit of help with that, just FYI. Okay, so why this conversation? So through this conversation, we're really going to focus on a range of scales, right? We're going to look at the home, the street, the neighbourhood, the cultural landscape, a wider sort of landscape idea of retrofit. And a really brilliant question came up earlier, which we get asked a lot, and you know this came up a lot last week at the Building Centre about this word retrofit, and like the word in itself puts people off so much. And you know our work at Civic Square has been really focused on broadening the landscape, broadening the people, broadening the work and the projects and the types of ideas and work that see something like retrofit as a deep site of possibility, of many co-benefits, of imagination, as opposed to just a technical act that we need to do really quickly, which we're also failing quite miserably on. And you heard me talk about at the beginning of the day, like a lot of this was for us framed by a moment in 2021 where there was the government green grants program that saw hundreds of millions returned to government because apparently there was a low uptake interested in retrofit. And we all have this endless conversation, right, of like, what's the language? What's the right thing to call it? Shouldn't we call it this or shouldn't we call it that? And we kind of like sort of sit in that, but then also kind of really moved on from this, which was what's most important to us is to create the many different entry points, particularly starting the conversation from different places, which I'll share about in a second. And you know, there's a team member here sitting from Civic Square called Bing, who, if you're really interested in how our communication changes, if we're talking to one of our neighbours about a warmer home or a more playful street or joining their street party and thinking about bills, right? We can talk about that. or, you know, when we're talking about our projects, maybe we don't start with civic infrastructure. We might talk about a place to make or create or eat or share, and why that's important. So there's a lot there that we can unpack around language, and I think it's critical, but not to get lost in it, because equally for us, there's this whole field of people working in Retrofit, which is at the moment seen very much through a couple of lenses of interventions to the home, but also people who are understanding this at all sorts of different scales. And what we're starting to see through our work is that actually, when we think about the amount of things that can happen when we build healthier homes, streets, places where people live, the amount of many co-benefits. And just to get rid of that sort of jargony piece, like if you do that, how many other great things can happen? So we haven't done this much today, which has been wonderful to not be in lots of talks. But for some of you who are interested, I'd really recommend going back to some of the Building Centre talks on the live stream. And in there, one of the big, juicy panels that we did in the morning, led by Indy Johar from Dark Matter Labs, who's one of the partners on this project, really talked at a large scale and from many different perspectives why Retrofit Reimagined. Why it's critical that this is not just about, although these things are all important, our carbon targets, it's not just about our bills, it's not just about solar, it's about so much more than this, a fundamental reimagination of the way that we live, the way we relate to one another, the way we will exist on the land that we're on and the materials that we use. And there's a number of really deep and in many ways quite existential things that came up in that talk that I'd really recommend for those of you who are like quite inspired by today and you're like, okay, there's something I can really hold on to here. And so for us, again, as we're going to talk about scales, this is really how this beautiful, eclectic, quite random and festival type approach that you see at every site is because those entry points are multiple. They start in many different places. There's as much relevance to be somewhere like the Building Centre as there is being right here in the heart of Knowle West, as there was being in the swimming pool in Balsall Heath, as there will be being at one of the most interesting demonstrators of alternative energy and alternative technology in McGuirk. And for us, those scales really are interdisciplinary, interdependent, and one isn't more important than the other. But you'll all know that quite often, the one of the home and the street is really sort of seen as this place where you're going to go and consult at people. You're going to go and ask them a few questions. It's kind of nice, it's important to get your funding, it's important for other things, it's important for uptake, but it's not seen as a really serious and legitimate, and almost from Civic Square's position, this fundamental point at which the actual transition has its most energy, power, agency. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But to just give you a little bit of an idea, this is where the work really started for us. It's part of some of the work that Dark Matter Labs did. And of course, you don't need to see all the detail on here. It's to kind of signpost you to a set of blogs and other things that were written a couple of years ago that really took us on this journey, that make us come across all these different disciplines and have like a really serious conversation. Because actually, when we talked about this, there's low uptake and that the government green grants moment that I talk about. There's so many interconnected, interdependent things that mean that we are struggling with that one home every 3 seconds, not in a linear way, but concurrently until 2030. And so this started us to really think about, actually, we need a completely different conversation. We have to understand this in many, many different ways. A second key sort of diagram for us was starting from a point of, this is just calling it sort of underperforming housing, which you can completely reframe. But when I say that Retrofit in the home is this site of complete possibility and imagination, it's because we know that there are so many primary, secondary, tertiary, like first order, second order, third order things that happen when we fundamentally live in unsafe, expensive, unhealthy homes, and those impacts are both lifelong, they're on everything from health to educational attainment to things that happen within a community. We had a beautiful conversation this morning with Dulwara, who just spoke about that from a very real and everyday perspective. So you start to look at this, and these diagrams, if some of this really got into you and you're like, I want to know a bit more behind how we go here, or how we get to some of what you're talking about when it comes to retrofit. There's more diagrams that we have on this that show in different places. We mapped it in our city, Birmingham, of like who's paying for all of this. So people are paying for this, as we all know. They're paying for it when our education attainment is struggling. They're paying for it when health outcomes are poor, and we find it very, very difficult to invest in preventing of that. And so for us, the home, and then all the scales that come out of that, is a really radical and really bold site of possibility and imagination. And when we think at Civic Square about the home, street and neighbourhood, we think this is critical to our, not just like thinking about it in a way of the climate transition, we need everybody involved. We probably at Civic Square would go as far as saying that history shows us that if that part of society isn't hugely on board and all working towards a large-scale transition, it's actually near on impossible to do it from the top down. And we'll use a couple of examples of that in a sec. And so there's a whole series of things that you can read about if this is of interest. And there's lots and lots of other talks from Retrofit Reimagined, from other sites. And this is my final chance to also invite you to Glasgow and Cat to say that we can explore it more there. But actually, when we talk about this idea that we need these large-scale shifts, and you've seen them everywhere, what you start to understand is that why the home, street and neighbourhood and starting the conversation in places like this and in work like this is so critical is because when you look at some of these big shifts, some of the big things that the systems work has shown, is that actually in every conversation, if you look back at the recording of John's peers in Borthwick and the neighbours that had gone through the recent LADS programme, or you listen to Dilwara's conversation about what happened when she went from being an individual on a street to looking at what they might do as a collective, you start to see that people in their places fundamentally understand these knots. They understand why we need to, if you watch back that talk from Balsall Heath, you'll see that everybody there was talking about a set of conflicting and complex information from many different contractors and providers, and didn't know what was happening here, or they weren't, and they were very grateful that work had happened on their homes, but they had described really, really deeply and really practically from their perspective that they needed to move away from confusing and intermittent information from many different contractors towards empowering systems that build knowledge and collective agency, of which Dilwara and others have talked about. And we see it here. I don't know if Tony and Bill are still in the room, but we can see it, what happens when people are at the forefront of building their homes in Knowle West. So finally, to kind of wrap up from this little bit, is to kind of say to you that when we're talking about these scales, I don't think any of us, but certainly none of the partners, believe that there are the serious people looking at like the national approach, right? How you'll often fall into these hierarchies of like, we're the people making the top-down approach to this huge challenge that we have, and we've got all the knowledge. We don't really believe at all that there is a hierarchical difference in how important all these different scales are. This conversation is going to explore why those many different scales are critical. And we're here as part of this festival to really champion the street, the home, the street and the neighbourhood. And finally, to wrap up this point, we often come at it from the point that the home and the street where you live is where you experience the impacts of that big system diagram, or of the big emergencies through your bills, through your food prices, through many other health crises and other things. And as Dilwara and many other conversations have shown here in We Can Make and in Knowle West, that's also the place where your agency is also greatest, where you can do something, you can really make a difference. And all through history, we know that when we need to make huge changes to society, some would argue that it's time for a new social settlement, it's the time for something large, that even when we did things like the NHS, it wasn't just a a prime minister sort of standing up on a block and saying, hey, the war is over. Can you go and all get healthy? Because we need to rebuild the country economy. And people were like, yeah, great. I'll just grab my trainers and head to Parkrun. Going to get healthy to rebuild the country, right? We had to build infrastructure. And so came things like the neighbourhood GPs, democratising the most amount of knowledge, agency, spaces, skills to people. And you can start to see that story happening everywhere. You can see these interconnections happening. And many, many years before the NHS, the Tredegar Medical Aid Society and the worker co-ops were organising around need, organising around what they needed. And they were asking big bonkers questions. What if healthcare was there at point of need, not whether you could pay? At a time where in society that would have been a bonkers question. So when you're looking at your little booklet, and on the back it asks this big question of what if the retrofit and climate transition of this country was designed, owned and governed and led by the people, led by the neighbourhoods and the communities that live in them. That might sound like, oh yeah, it's not actually possible, is it? But I would argue that what's happening in this festival, in this time, is akin to the many, many different people that were part of demonstrating the futures that we know are an inevitability, and they're not quite here yet. So I just want to invite you to kind of drop your shoulders, open your minds, and really think about how all these different layers come together. And we'll hear literally from the landscape level, but also want to remind you about the criticality of that moment where someone sets up a sharing library on their street and suddenly the street understands itself in very different ways, and sort of welcome you to this panel now. And I think that's enough for my provocation. But you can just see we started in a field last year. We're going all over the country. Make sure you come. This is the theme. I've already said that. There is an access fund. Please make sure, critical this one, big one, make sure that if you know someone in your community or in neighbourhood or in something that you're working on that would benefit from coming to Machynlleth or coming to Glasgow and would want more of this, take one of the cards and make sure you get them there. Because these types of moments where we come together should really be a privilege and shouldn't actually be the norm. We all know that we can't travel as much, we can't come together as much, we all know there's loads of work to do in our places. And so when there are these moments, we should really absolutely make the most of them, because we are the generation that's got to rebuild this all and make sure that we leave something much better. So please do come. And so on that note, I'm going to play a tiny video to show you what's been happening so far across the journey, and you'll be added to this. Bristol and all that's happened today will be added to this and played in Machynlleth, which is next, and then we're going to go on to a panel and have a lovely chat. So that's why we're here, and I invite you to reflect on from which positionality, which scale, which layer do you feel like you have most agency, and that can be the discussion that we also have over dinner as well. Okay, so you've heard enough from me. We're going to go over to a lovely panel. Unfortunately, one of the panelists has not been able to join us, so we're going to play a film in their place, which is a super awesome film as well. But just like in the backdrop of this week at a national level, like let's just try and channel that. God, I dare anyone to walk into this room and tell me that there isn't a different way, and there isn't an incredibly vivacious and eclectic and smart, rigorous, deeply rooted national movement of people that believe that something else is possible. And so on that note, someone who embodies that the most for me is the incredible Sara Edmonds, who's going to kick us off by talking a little bit about the scale of the house and how the house is not the point, which is what I've got in my notes. Thanks, Melissa. I'll pass over to you.
Thank you. I feel really conflicted in a way about this because I kind of feel that I want to do justice to the scale of the house, because I think maybe the best way to talk about it is maybe through my relationship with that as an architect, but also as another recovering architect. Or what did you call yourself? A reformed architect? I don't know. No, recovering? Okay, we're still recovering. Still recovering. Architect Reimagined. Oh, we're going to have fun with this. So from my experience, so I'm an architect by background, and a realization kind of came, my journey with all this started when I left big practice architecture for personal reasons, which actually I thought were personal reasons, but are actually systemic reasons. Like, you can't have a family life if you're an architect. Like, I'm being kind of generalistic here, but you really do struggle. I didn't want that. So I left and set up on my own. And a couple of years into practice, a lot of my work was on doing extensions to family homes. And largely you're doing that for people who can afford such a thing. But also it was kind of wild to me that we were like designing quite well-performing extensions and you're plugging them onto the back of a leaky home. And I was like, doesn't make sense. Make it make sense. Why are we doing this? And I was really struggling. And at that same time, I was learning about the impact of the built environment on our climate and the fact that, 20% of our emissions come from heating our homes and all of this. And I felt really alone as a practitioner, as an architect on my own. And so I found ACAN and kind of was in a room similar to this vibe right now, where you sort of felt like, oh, I'm with my people, I feel understood, I feel seen, what can we do together? And there was the beginning of agency to like take action collectively, where you thought, okay, I'm not so alone now, so now what? What's the move? So through that was still this kind of like in-depth kind of connection to the house and thinking about, oh, there are 28 million homes and we need to retrofit them all, so that big 20% figure of emissions isn't coming from those homes anymore. And it never feels like a smaller problem the more that you deal with it. It always seems like this really huge problem. But we were still progressing in that way. We were still like, right, how do we unlock this? What do we do? Fast forward a little bit more, and I'm not practicing anymore. I'm just sort of being out there, being a mouthpiece for like, shit, things are not looking great. What are we going to do? And like just talking about like the need for the industry to kind of recognize that what we're doing isn't really good enough. So then what? And I got really frustrated at an event where there was a lot of hand-wringing going on from that same industry who were like, just don't know how to fix this. Like, what should we do? And I know, coming from this history of like volunteering with people who are desperately trying to change things and releasing papers and lobbying and doing campaigns. I mean, Barbara's in the room somewhere as well, who has also been involved in campaigning for the change when it comes to like how we're dealing with the home. And then you have everybody who has potentially more agency and has decision-making powers and still wringing their hands saying, like, what should we do? Like, you could start paying people. That's what you could do. You could start paying the people who are doing the heavy lifting to try and make this change instead of, like, wishing it was a better situation. And the flip side of, like, being out there talking about this was that I then was about to give up on it all because it was voluntary and I couldn't maintain it anymore, and I was about to go back to making maybe slightly less leaky extensions to less leaky homes, I don't know. But I did, at that moment, having spoken out quite publicly, then get approached to do some work with Built Environment Smarter Transformation and also the Passive House Trust at the time. And that was about a year and a half ago. So started to work then and realizing that there's quite a lot of people actually on the industry side too who want to make a change. So then I was thinking to myself, well, maybe my role can be transitional and actually bridging a bit of the gap between the two frustrations. Then an opportunity arose. The National Retrofit Hub was born. That was maybe 8 months ago. And they advertised for the director of that. And everything I had done for the last 3 or 4 years was retrofit. And that people were looking at me going, you gonna go for it? You gonna go for it? And I was like, no way. The National Retrofit Hub. Are you having a laugh? And Rachel said, you know, this job kind of sounds like it was written for us. Don't you think we should apply for it? So we did apply for it. And we went in with that same radical vision of, we need to wholesale change the way we're thinking about this. And this is what we would do if we got this job. And then we walked away from the interview thinking, there's no way we're getting this job. And then we got the job. Woo! So we got the job. And Rachel and I are like in this continual state of like, we got the job, it's going to be great. Then, oh my God, what have we done? We can't do this. We can do this. We can't do this. We can do this. So we're trying to do this. And, and so then comes the question back to the home, right? Because there's still a lot of focus on how do we retrofit the 28 million homes. Now, it is really important to focus on the individual home for some things as like a test bed technically for what can you do when you're faced really, intimately with these materials, as John has described so beautifully through his work with the zero carbon house, his home, his work with the zero carbon house, his home, right? And when you need to know what's going to happen when you put two materials together, or what's going to happen if you put materials under pressure, what's going to happen if that pressure is like, a changing climate outside, what's going to happen, how do we make sure that people aren't suffering in their homes? And we know people are suffering in their homes. People are having to escape from their homes because it's too cold, or to have to escape from your home because it's too hot. Your home should be a place of sanctuary, and it should be the place that we honor as a place to love, as a place to care. I'm getting emotional, but it should be that. So I want to do justice. This is the second time in 2 days that I have cried about this. I think I'm having a moment, but I want to move away from the home as the unit that bears the responsibility to fix the problem. So I want to move towards the idea that it is not the place to lay the blame, not the place that the struggle has to be laid out. It's not the place that should bear the responsibility of the requirements to perform alone. We have to flip that narrative so that it becomes seen as a place that we should thrive in, that we should cherish as a place for all those wonderful things that happen, for the fact that all of you are here today as wonderful beings who came up through different experiences in those homes. But also, it wasn't just alone in those homes, it was in community. And I'm really struck, and I'm going to stop now and pass it on because I think I've kind of oscillated a little bit and gone different places. But I am starting to wonder about the fact that, we need to get some of those technical bits right. But to quote Indy Johar, or shall I say to paraphrase, because maybe this isn't the quote, but we don't have the hydrocarbon credits to mine all the materials, to do the retrofit in the way that the industry thinks we can do the retrofit. So if we don't have that, then what? And we have to move past the then what. And perhaps that is about extracting the responsibility from all of the things that we're asking of the home and the systems that control that. Like we have individual gas boilers in houses that are divided up into multi-tenure occupancies. That's wild. We have the responsibility for individual mortgages and everybody seeing the home as like this way to extract financial value. That's wild. So within all those structural systems, we need to work out how do we take out some of the responsibility and put that into the commons. So I'm really struck by something that I think it was Farzana Khan who brought it up at London last week, who described the care blocks in Bogota, where essentially they've done that. They've sort of like dropped in within half an hour walking access, these care blocks in the city. So there's a blanket laid out to provide access for all those needs, like childcare needs, laundry needs, like sharing community in common needs. And doesn't that then immediately like release some of the pressure off the shoulders of the individual home? And then maybe there's space to think about those other bits that we can get much closer to without having to bear the whole responsibility for it. So I think we have an obligation in this moment where we have to have those honest conversations. And I'm not saying that we throw out everything we've done up until now with Retrofit at all. We need all of that. And Immy always talks about the fact that we need those people. We need the technical skills, the architects, the engineers, everybody who has access to that level of information. But we also need to understand where the responsibility lies for delivering Retrofit. And I mean really delivering Retrofit. I don't mean like who's coming out to just lay on the external wall insulation in the homes. So that's enough for me.
Oh man, I love her. Thank you so much. And yeah, like building on this piece about the home bearing the brunt of the responsibilities that are systemic failures, that see the home as a speculative asset to extract as much value from, to all the imaginations that we need to allow to be possible. It doesn't mean that by exploring, other ways that we're saying suddenly we all have to live differently, but we do know that we need to create the space where we could ask other questions. And I know on our Slack channel, somebody shared a couple of days ago an article where different rooms in houses are becoming climate rooms. So, one can deal with extreme heat and one can deal with extreme cold rather than the whole house, because what if we won't have time to do the whole house? Or, exploring ideas like the care blocks. And particularly I'd like to point you to, because there's a lot of content, and I think it's really important now we start to take responsibility for, if something interests you, to go out and hear more about it, because I'd argue we also don't have enough time to wait till the next time that these ideas might come up again. And Araceli Camargo did a great talk last year about the home as the place where healing begins. And I would really echo some of those ideas, and Dilwara started to touch on them a little bit this morning, that some of what we're talking about is a return to things that we knew about living in community, and some of it is innovation and all the things that got discussed earlier about everything between innovation and what we already know. And so to hold that plurality and hold the space to reimagine, I think is really critical. Thank you so much, Sara, for that reflection. It was beautiful. Should we have another little round of applause? So next up, we were going to have the wonderful Hilary Powell, and they did do a talk at Moseley Road, Baths as well, where you can watch a film about what they did, and they were also at the Building Centre. So you can also watch some clips on the song that they did outside the Building Centre that got us in a lot of trouble because they let off flares and the Building Centre lost their minds, and it was all quite wonderful, to be honest, but, that was wonderful for us. It wasn't really wonderful for them. But in place of Hilary, we're going to show the 6-minute clip, and especially encourage over dinner we can talk a little bit more about the work that they're doing. And you may know that Hilary Powell and Dan Edelstein are an artist and filmmaker that live in Walthamstow, and this film will tell you a little bit more about what they're up to. But I recommend their previous film, Bank Job, as well, if you want to know a bit more about what they've done.
I don't think there is anything that is more important than sorting out our energy system into a way that's not going to be destroying the planet. There just isn't anything more important than that at the moment. It's reached such a point of crisis.
It's a major crisis that doesn't feel like enough importance is being put on.
There's only 4 or 5 years now until we'll break the 1.5 degrees warming target. You might decarbonise by 2050, but if you do all the work in the last decade, then it might well be too late. I think we need to start now with a great sense of urgency.
The planet is just naturally very beautiful, and we want to be able to use a sustainable source of energy that isn't going to harm the planet. We don't want to turn the world we have into a horrible dystopia. We want to live in a nice world. We want electricity, but not at the cost of the entire earth.
Most of you who are here probably know what the concept of power station is. It was just an idea, basically, a concept of bringing together a community around renewable energy on one street. And it happens to be the street that most of us live on.
Name is Ejaz Hussain, 131 Lynmouth Road. But call me Ali. Easy.
My name is Nora Mannion.
Hi, my name is Fatima. I'm 19 years old.
I'm 18.
I'm 15.
My name is Chi, and I'm at number 63 Lynmouth Road. We live in the last house on the street, number 150.
So can you just say your name and where we are?
George Thompson, Garage, Lynmouth Road.
Does that worry you at the moment, like the volatility of the prices of energy?
It worries me if it's going to go up to, the percentage that they're saying it is.
At this point, there's a massive cost of living crisis as well.
You analyse these things when your bills are going through the roof and you're not sure what to do next, like most of the country, I suppose.
We have like this little meter in the house, and it tells you on a daily basis how much money you're spending on energy. And lately it's just been going up and up and up, so you can see the change with your own eyes.
Bills are going up, electricity, water, so it is becoming harder to run a household.
It could be freezing in this country and people are scared to even put their heating on.
I'm sitting in a blanket because I can't afford to pay the bill because I've got this system. It shows you £15 a day, £16 a day. Just can't do it. I'm a retired old boy.
I mean, now I just worry when I have to turn on the heating, and I need it because of my health condition.
The financial and ecological crises are intertwined.
We had this idea that we'll act like the government, create our own stimulus, our own Green New Deal.
The reality is if the government was to get every home in this country, turn it into a power station, then the cost of that would be paid for by the sun itself within about a 10-year period. It's just absurd that that's not happening, so why don't we make it happen? Should we hit the street then?
Yes.
Good luck.
Hello. So we'd like as many people as possible to put these posters up.
We're going to raise the money to offer everyone no strings attached free solar energy. We're going to sell art, and then with the proceeds we'll buy all the solar panels.
What kind of qualifications have you got to be doing this then?
Fuck you. We used to run our own artist bank up the road. We sold banknotes and bought up and then blew up 1.2 million of high interest debt. So now it's like a political campaign, like this is what the government should be doing. We're seeing ourselves as like putting a Green New Deal stimulus into the street.
Dear neighbour, we're now moving to putting panels on the first 20 houses on the street. You would have thought on a street of 134 houses, 20 houses would not be an issue. Oh my God.
It still does feel like the future is in the control of the big companies that make big bucks.
It feels very much that it's all just about money. It's a duty of care of like these big businesses to do more.
It's difficult not to feel a little bit despairing.
Where you just kind of don't get involved in things that you feel like you can't change.
A lot of people in this country feel a little bit powerless.
You, because of the money, are trying to put the brakes on. The point was we wanted to do the whole street, but yeah, financially we've got a bigger challenge ahead.
You've got all these amazing ideas, and I'm like, where's the money? You know, because we don't have enough yet.
I know, but we will.
Are you frightened up there?
Yeah, I really am.
Power to the people. The couple taking fundraising to new heights to bring solar energy to their street.
We're staying on the roof until we raise enough money to get our power station built.
We're actually trying to raise £100,000. Fingers crossed we can get there. So the idea is that we'll sleep up here every night until we've raised enough money. We are certainly a cold experience.
I really don't.
What you could do with those is put them flat on the ground and tie them, and then when the wind stops we can put them back up.
I think we spoke about this as well, Dan and Hilary, that you know better than anyone what it's like to live on a roof because you were up there, so you know what it's like to be a solar panel essentially, and it does get windy and stormy up there.
This is Tom from Octopus. This is Nick.
Hello.
Meg. Hi. Sharon.
Hi, Nick. Hi. Hi, Meg.
That's
Hi, Sharon.
Ejaz there.
But yeah, the goal is 5th of June to start installing.
Woohoo! Sounds great. The first 15 houses on the street have all had panels put on. from Octopus. So now where we're at is we want to take everything that we've learned and the partnerships which we've created, which have been hard won as well, take those out across Britain.
So you're producing electricity straight away now?
Most of the house's energy was all running off the
Great.
solar panels.
Yeah.
And I was shocked. I was like, okay, yeah, this is more than I expected.
I'm going to have a powerhouse. It's amazing. I'm over the moon.
What I have learned is, as a group, when we come together, anything's possible, because we thought this was going to take us a good couple of weeks.
Really?
So we've done really well with the installation, really well.
And also we raised some money to put solar panels on the school. We are working with Solar for Schools to get all our schools in Waltham Forest generating their own energy so they can save money and reduce their carbon emissions too.
We need to pull together and stand up to these bigger companies.
Power means everything.
Government has responsibility. We've got to make sure we wake them up.
When we involve people and we take the time to think about how do people participate in the climate crisis, that is how transformation happens.
You end up transforming the way people think about their energy and transforming the way they think about owning the infrastructure around them.
It's we've kind of had a little almost like proof of concept in London and showing, this very localized kind of impact, but how that can scale and adapt to different contexts. So it's really a show and do project.
We have to take power back to ourselves by actually doing something, not just by talking about it.
Power means strength, dignity, everyone coming as one.
I think I would love to be a part, even if that's a small part, in creating some change.
It's about the growing awakening. We're seeing all around us that we can have the power to make change.
And change the way Britain powers itself.
I mean, who knows? Everybody in Waltham Forest, everyone in the UK might end up with solar panels. It would be so amazing.
Amazing. And there's loads more we can tell you about that project, and you can watch back some talks from... you can watch back the talk from Dan and Hilary in the recordings from Moseley Road Baths as well. But as a short-term thing, I'd sign up to their newsletter. Dan sends out the most hilariously brilliant things every day about how they, through all their different creative means, are just getting on with trying to see what they can do about this, and it will certainly brighten your day. I would thoroughly recommend it. Okay, to move on swiftly now to look at the scale of the neighbourhood, we're going to hear a bit from Mellis. Do you have slides? Yeah. Yep. Okay, cool. We'll get them up as well. I'll move them on for you if that's okay.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you. Wow, how to follow that. I've been really thinking about how to frame this, because I'm still an architect. I'm heading towards the recovered architect. Just talking to someone in the audience earlier about how to wind up your architecture business, but don't tell anyone about that. Hi, Kyle, who's my co-director. You just heard that. Joking. No, but what I want to talk about is approaching everything here in like a stealthy way, because I work to deliver affordable housing, social housing for my local authority clients and my community clients. Like, for instance, the first purpose-built community land trust in London, really proud that's now built. So, but a few years ago, just didn't feel comfortable with just building new homes and just focusing on this, and I knew that I wasn't making the impact I wanted to personally in my career. So I went to it was in COVID, I went on this online webinar about retrofit, and it was so dry, and it was so technical, and I was really interested to hear a talk from this community manager from a big housing association. And he said, yeah, it's brilliant. We've got all these retrofit plans for all these homes, and we're rolling it out. And I asked the question, have they all happened? You've got these plans. And he said, oh, well, no, because 40% of the homes refused the work because they didn't understand what was happening to their home, and it was really disruptive, even though it cost them nothing. They didn't understand the benefits. And I just felt sick to the stomach that all this work and all this money was being misspent because nobody was talking to the people who it was happening to. And as an architect who really focuses on talking to people first before you decide what's best for them, or never deciding what's best, asking them what's best, I felt that we had a role to play in this retrofit journey. And at the same time, we were talking about the Green New Deal. I was trying to get some money for my home, but all the contractors were refusing because they were being paid so slowly they couldn't cash flow it. And now we're dealing with, we're dealing with the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which is so badly managed and has to be spent so quickly that all these housing associations with millions of pounds are not bothering to spend the time talking to the people whose homes they're working on. So my stealthy approach is to go in and say, we can do all the technical stuff. We can do, in collaboration with the brilliant Florence from Humblebee over there, because she's our go-to person who really strengthens our technical stuff. We say, okay, we can do all that. Could you just maybe let us talk to the community first about what they want? It will be just like a few £1,000s, and we'll do 10 workshops, and we will help you deliver value for your ultimate customers. And it might reframe what you decide to do in the end. Maybe you'll get better value for it in the end. Maybe you'll get better uptake, etc. So in a way, everything I have to share is a little bit like sanitized, because my approach is to do that from the inside rather than, in a way, I have to find the client first with the budget. That's my role. That's me sort of justifying why it's a bit, different from what other people have said. So I'm going to share a project, and at the end, I'm going to come up with some provocations of where I think it should go. So, it's amazing Ade in the middle of the slide, one of the members of the Becontree Estate resident group who we met last year. And she told us some really similar things. She lives in this house, it's overcrowded, it's literally too expensive to heat, so she doesn't bother, but so she keeps the windows closed, so the mold continues, etc., etc. You know all about that. And if you just go to the aerial shot, she lives in the Becontree Estate. This is a historic photo of when it was first built in the interwar period. 29,000 homes, all built within, I think, 8 years. It's still the largest social housing estate in Europe. It's now a third privately owned homes, third social tenants, a third council owned. I think I've got confused, but it's a split tenure. 100 years later, this is a picture taken by one of our residents with his drone. It's not changed dramatically, it's been expanded a bit, but the bare bones of the kind of garden city principle movements that it was designed is still there. The opportunity of retrofit on this estate is insane. 29,000 homes of basically three types. I mean, your mind blows with the sense of repetition that's possible here. So we built some social housing for our client, and we started posing the question of retrofit in this estate. He was interested, he got the funding. And then we sort of started saying, I think that rather than just provide, he wanted to do a retrofit design guide, and I know there's so much boredom with more guides of what to do. But we said, okay, we'd love to do that, but can we talk to the residents first about what is their experience of their home before we design it for them? So that's just a photo of one of the workshops we did outside what will be the demonstrator house. And I think you could skip this because it's just about all the things you know about actually that's the borough of Barking and Dagenham, and the bit circled in purple in the middle is the Becontree Estate, so it's so much of the borough, and it's also where basically the worst health outcomes exist. I mean, you know all this, I'm preaching to the converted, so next slide, thanks. Oh, well, just the implications of unhealthy homes on the NHS is huge, and we're framing our work in terms of healthy homes predominantly, yeah. So it's kind of gone a bit weird that, but you can see the principle of it. So when we first met with our community group, we had all these models we'd made of their different house types, and we had groups representing each tenure on each model. And we didn't say, hey, what's your biggest barrier to retrofit? We said, hey, tell us about your home. How do you live in it? What are your issues? And what we found out was overcrowding, lack of ability to heat and cool the home, and people who were doing what you talked about earlier, unfortunately having climate rooms that they could only sleep in certain seasons, etc. And that was our framing for the retrofit design. So that hasn't worked, that slide, so we'll move on to the next one. And that's a bit, bleh. Next one. So these models for us were about saying to the group, you're committed to this over a number of weekends. They had to come to an abandoned shopping centre on a Saturday and be paid in not enough vouchers and a pizza, but they came. And we were saying, we care about your home, we're giving this a lot of attention. And then we used various different methods for like interviewing them about their priorities. And then if you go to the next slide, we made a slice through of a typical home, and we built up their understanding of retrofit. And we didn't, how do I say this? Nobody knew about that they had a subfloor. And so we had this like hour about subfloors. And I wanted to make, one of my provocations was about trusting ordinary people to take on detailed knowledge. It's amazing what people from not in the built environment world will, if they're shown it in an engaging way, will want to understand. And that was a big point for me. I felt like everybody left these workshops with agency and passion. And that's really important at a neighbourhood scale, because what we want is these people to be advocates for retrofit in their community. Neighbours telling neighbours positive news stories about retrofit is really essential in our kind of how we see this project going on. I mean, so yeah, we made lots of models. One's on show at the Building Centre at the moment. And we also reduced the information to things that also gave people a lot of decision-making power, so showing where is heat lost in your home, really easily to understand. And one of the big things that people were nervous of is they don't have enough money to do everything. So how could we enable them to take the first step in a retrofit journey that wouldn't preclude a journey to net zero? So we have designed this process in a way that you're never making something else not possible. And we have, one thing we're talking about with our client is about like the Becontree retrofit passport. So each home is shown on a particular point in a journey, and when you sell it or you whatever, you demonstrate where you are on that journey and hand over this toolkit, whatever you call it, to say this is where we are and you could take it on, because there's so much lack of knowledge when you sell a home, you know, or the surveyors are not worth their time or money, forget it, you know, they don't even bother opening things up. So this could be something, if someone bothers to invest their time into their home, can we pass that on in terms of information? And yeah, this is a boring slide. All I want to say is that our client was really, really keen that he felt probably right that lots of people only invest in their home when they're also extending their home, because classically that is the case. And like you talked about the slap on the really well-performing bit at the back. So we have worked to create typical designs where you retrofit and extend your home at the same time. And that's all now feeding into emerging planning policy for this estate. So that when you apply to build a house extension, you have like a retrofit ready one that you can just do without getting like a permitted development retrofit. Where am I next? And yeah, the map on the left is actually Melissa's map of interwar housing in the UK, and that is the scale of opportunity even of this type of home, which is extraordinary. So my provocations are, my first one I've said about trusting people and allowing them into the process. My second one is about they are looking for something to trust. Similarly to what you've said earlier, everybody who spoke to, Ade particularly, said, I'm bamboozled by the information from local contractors. And then you've got the client saying, oh, we want to keep the spend local, we want the contractors local. So what about some kind of, I think of it as like a trust hub, a retrofit trust hub, local hub, where you're being able to recommend contractors, recommend advice, you know, like the care blocks you talked about earlier. And I think keeping information, trust, contractors, passion local is really important. And I think the Becontree estate is a massive opportunity for that. I think I'll end there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mellis. And I don't know if this is me just kind of, I've lost the word now, but me making assumptions from when you started to say, like, you felt like your talk was going to be quite different to everybody else's. I would say, like, and, you know, the team that have been working on this in Birmingham on Link Road, like, I'd say that our assessment of everything you said is like literally the same. You know, we've found that no matter the level of complexity, if you unpack it in creative ways, people are able to be a part of that story. We know that there's so much in being able to track the histories of what's happened and the futures, so that there is knowledge and trust built. The need for, you know, as people-powered retrofit have also really shown the need for kind of like neighbourhood-based sites where you can connect up this knowledge. And so I wanted to say that actually it's really fascinating to hear that we followed each other, but we haven't actually ever worked together. That I'd say almost word for word, I was looking at you like we would absolutely say from our demonstrator street that this is fundamentally how people want to engage, how they want to interact, how they want to work together, how they want to know more about their home and what's happening and unpack complex ideas. And so, yeah, I was probably thinking, gosh, okay, we finally found someone who could help us with the So I want to say thank you so much, because I know you were almost like, yeah, I'm coming sort of from the inside, and I'm like, this is incredible. So thank you so much, and should we have a round of applause for Mellis as well? So moving swiftly on to, again, I feel like I'm just here with a bunch of rock stars having a great time. So I'm really excited to welcome anyone who's ever part of ACAN, because I think, first of all, it's really fundamental to situate ACAN in the arc of what's happened in this country and how much fundamental, starting from activism and organising out from there, how much you folks have all been able to shift the landscape and the conversation. And many of you will know that lots of things are changing rapidly at pace in the architecture environment. And I think you guys have really been on the precipice of that. And now you're, not now you're, but Built by Nature is also something that we're incredibly inspired by. So without much ado, I'm going to pass over to Joe to hear a little bit more about your sort of provocation at the scale of landscape.
Thank you. I've only been here for the afternoon, and it's been incredibly inspiring. And I mean, this room, all of you, you're an incredibly inspiring group of people. But it's also been very full, hasn't it? And you guys have been doing this for a whole day. So I wanted to just say well done to you for sticking in. But I think that the atmosphere that's been created this evening is perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. I mean, there's people down here sketching, illustrating. We're all up here with cups of tea. Someone was knitting on the sofa down there. And so in that spirit, I'm gonna start with an extract of a poem. It's an extract from Maya Angelou's When Great Trees Fall. When great trees fall, rocks on distant hills shudder, lions hunker down in tall grasses, and even elephants lumber after safety. When great trees fall, in forests, small things recoil into silence, their senses eroded beyond fear. When great souls die, the air around us becomes light, rare, sterile. We breathe, briefly, see with a hurtful clarity. There's much more of that poem, but I'm going to stop there. I want to start by just talking about trees. And whilst I've never been to this tree, I've never visited the Sycamore Gap, as soon as I saw the picture of it lying on its side in the landscape, I was reminded of this poem that was read out at my granny's funeral. And this, to me, was as moving a moment, I think, even though I'd never visited this tree. So I just want to start with the tree and to talk about how special trees are to us as humans. I mean, we evolved from a species that lived in trees, and when the grasslands open up, we would then run between the trees across the open plains, always going from tree to tree. And from then until now, we've actually lived in a very symbiotic relationship with trees and forests. And whilst it might have waned a bit in modern day society, even now we hold these immense personal relationships with trees. And so for me, the trees that are special to me, I think about the eucalyptus tree that is in the back of my garden that I look at every single day, and it flutters in the kind of sunlight, the sunset that comes through it is incredibly beautiful. Or I think about the willow tree that I grew up with, and it was just taller than the two-story house that I grew up in, and I would climb up it just to the point where I could see over the house and to the field behind. And then one day the neighbours chopped it down, and I was devastated, and it never grew back. and there was nothing that we could do about it. So we all have these stories. Every one of us has this kind of personal connection to trees. Even the Conservative Party logo is a tree.
We're doing so well.
Brought it back down. But then, so some trees then attain legendary status, and this sycamore gap tree was one of those. It was an icon of the north, and people on social media have compared it to the angel of the north. And so I don't think its cultural significance cannot be overstated, and it's that I want to dwell on. I mean, I've already talked about the manner of its felling and how emotional that was for so many people, and there's been this big kind of outpouring of grief over the death of a loved one. But some commentators have pointed out that the very reason that the tree was so iconic was that it was standing alone in a dip in the landscape. And it's because it was standing alone in that dip and the landscape was so degraded that led to its iconic status. And a couple of professors in physical geography at Northumbria University wrote a really good article about this. They're called Bronwyn Whitney and Matthew Pound, and I want to just read out a bit of what they wrote. They wrote in an article for The Conversation. They said 300 years ago, at the beginning of this tree's life, upland Northumberland had already shifted away from mixed arable and pastoral to predominantly sheep and cattle farming. The sheer dominance of pastures and open farmland near Hadrian's Wall, where this tree is, led to this one sycamore becoming an icon of Northumberland, in part because of the relative rarity of trees on the landscape. And the present day marks the lowest point in our relationship with nature over the tree's entire 300-year lifespan. So what is next for this landscape? How can we reimagine it? That's what I want to think about here for a bit. And perhaps this landscape here should become a forest again, and that might start with the very regrowth of this very tree, because it's not dead. It's a sycamore, and sycamores can be coppiced. And so there is a chance that this sycamore will regrow, and maybe in 100 years it might be the same scale as it was. I want to just move then from the tree to the forest scale. And many of you will probably know where this is. And in fact, when I put this together, I actually wasn't aware that there were going to be a load of like wood and tree boffins in the room. And I was just in a workshop upstairs, which was all about grading different tree species. And it was fascinating. But so yeah, anyway, this is Hook Park. So I just wanted to tell you a bit about Hook Park. It's in Dorset. And it's managed by the Architectural Association. It's their kind of woodland campus. So students at the AA go out there and spend time out there and work with the woodland. The trees you see on screen here actually date from long before the Architectural Association had the site. It's classed as a kind of ancient semi-natural woodland. It dates a very, very long way back, but it's got quite an interesting recent history, because after the Second World War, it was clear-felled. So what you see there on screen, 90% of the trees in this woodland were harvested, and that was for the post-war construction boom. We had a kind of devastating situation, and we had to fulfill this dire housing need. So woodlands across the country actually were felled to provide wood for construction. Shortly after this, in the 50s, the Forestry Commission bought the site or acquired the site and replanted it. But they replanted it with a very different mission. They wanted to create a species, a diverse mix of species, and they wanted to create a woodland that would not be clear-felled again, that it would be selectively harvested, and that the thinnings from this woodland would go to productive use. And for many years it was occupied by a furniture college, Parnham, and it was only in the year 2000 that the AA actually took it on. And what's interesting about this is the woodland is becoming increasingly species rich, so it's intensively managed by the school. And as I said, the woodland's thinned to provide timber for productive use for architectural projects. And you go around there and honestly, the woodland is dotted with the most amazing sculptures, structures, buildings that the students have made from that woodland. But you walk around the woodland and it's public, anyone can. And it's the most beautiful woodland you've been in because they have close to 20 different tree species there. And they've managed it to be like that. And in 50 years' time, it will be even more diverse. So they're building diversity into it and producing a range of timbers through that. And then to move on from forest to agriculture, because I'm talking about the forest here as a source of biomaterial, but it's only one source. And actually in the UK, we don't have that much forest. We've got one of the lowest forest coverages of the whole of Europe. We have 13% of the country covered in forest, and the European average is 30%, and in Finland and Sweden, they have more like 60% of the country covered in woodland. So we're not very wooded, and we probably won't be for a while, but what we do have is a lot of agricultural land, and we tend to look at that land as being solely for food production. We don't really think of it as a source of material for building. We don't associate the image of a field of corn with any kind of building material. Commonly, probably lots of people in this room would, but we don't really think about our cities when we look at those fields. And I would say that our built environment supply chains completely neglect this landscape. And it's so fitting that we're sitting in a straw building, and I did not know that when I was coming here, and that's just a wonderful little fact. So to conclude, I just want to tell you briefly about this project which is on screen, and I apologize for the quality of the image. It's probably not great, but I just think it's a really stunning and beautiful project. It was a design project at CSM in 2017 by an architect and designer from Thailand called Apelada Vorachat. This is cornspan, so it was a material. They've got a fantastic course at CSM called Material Futures, where the students kind of invent the most amazing materials for all sorts of uses. And cornspan was invented by Apelada. And basically what she recognized was that in Thailand, where she grew up in the kind of northern Thailand, Chiang Mai, every year when all of the corn was harvested, there would be a thick haze in the air because all of the husks and all of the waste from that agricultural process was burnt. It was just burnt, and it led to all sorts of negative health outcomes, terrible kind of effect on the environment. But she looked at that waste in a different way. She looked at that corn waste in a different way and thought, what can I make from this? And she made this material, cornspan, which is effectively just hand-pressed into a mold, and it's an insulating material. What I particularly love about it is that she's designed it in a format whereby it can be carried on the back in a weaved basket, also made from corn, so you can press it on site and then walk. And so what she's doing there is really profound, I think, because she's diverting biogenic carbon away from where it would have gone into the atmosphere, making it into a material that can then be used to insulate for sound insulation or thermal insulation and locked into a building. And that's the image that I want to leave you with, I suppose, just thinking about our homes and cities and neighborhoods and towns as being embedded in this landscape that can be both productive and natural. But there is a complete disconnect at the moment between our cities and the landscape. And just a final thing to end on. I mean, we've talked a lot about the sun, solar, about energy being powered by the sun. Well, our materials can be powered by the sun as well, and that's what all plants do. They are built by the sun. And so our houses and our this kind of retrofit revolution of both our homes, neighborhoods, and cities can be powered by the sun, not only for energy, but for the materials too.
Thank you so much, Joe. Because we're Well, we started 15 minutes late, but I want to try and pull us back as much as we can because we've got a lovely dinner, have lots of conversation on as well. I'm going to move swiftly on to Justin. And when we opened Impact Hub Birmingham, Radical Cities, Justin's book, was actually the first book that arrived to our address and was the first book on our bookshelf, which is always a nice memory. And I think you've been at the precipice of so many ideas and work like this for a long time. And now in your role as Chief Curator at the Design Museum, it would be really good to hear sort of your provocation about Retrofit, the scale of kind of culture.
Thanks, Immy. I've got some slides. Great. So maybe a few words of background about Future Observatory. I said before it's the National Design Research Program for the Green Transition, and what that means is that we fund research, design research, towards anything that can reduce carbon emissions or reduce waste or promote regenerative forms of practice. And over our current three-year funding period, we'll fund more than 100 projects, research projects that do that. Having said that, what we do is we fund the research and we support it and we try and oxygenate it within the confines of a museum and with all of the kind of, power a museum has to get ideas in front of people. But I'm not an expert on retrofit. I'm not a recovering architect. And to be frank, I have no practical advice for you whatsoever. So I'm going to talk about an idea. And Melissa very kindly asked me to speak about retrofit at the scale of culture. I will show you some cultural buildings, but I'm not going to talk about retrofit in culture. I'm going to talk about retrofit as culture. And what I mean by that is what it means in terms of a frame of mind, a worldview, an outlook. And the enemy of retrofit as culture is purity. Purity of an idea, purity of an aesthetic, architectural purity. That's really what I'm talking about today, architectural purity. Because architecture is a profession that thrives on purity. It feels the need for a blank piece of paper, a tabula rasa, a raised site. And it's interesting because it's interesting, well, perhaps there's certainly good reasons for that, and I would say that the history of architecture over the last 100 years have provided plenty of those reasons. Modernism was a form of architecture that reflected, a technological and social paradigm shift in the early 20th century that it felt justified to reject history and to say, actually, we need to build faster, we will build newer, we will build better, we have new ideas, we have new machines, history is irrelevant. But in fact, retrofit as culture requires a very different approach, a very different worldview. And if we can go to the next slide. Retrofit is not new. I mean, this is San Nicola in Carcere in Rome, and it began life as the Temple of Janus, a 3rd century BC Roman temple. It was gradually, built up upon to become a medieval church, a Renaissance church, a prison. All of those things overlap. It's a palimpsest of a buildings, 2,500 years of architectural history there. And you can see the Temple of Janus embedded in those. You see those columns embedded in that wall? That's the remains of the Temple of Janus. And what better metaphor, not just this building, but Janus himself. Janus was the two-faced god, facing in two directions, the past and the future. He's the God of transitions, the God of decisions, the God of thresholds, the God of passageways. What I'm saying is he's the God of retrofit. Can we have the next slide? And cities very rarely begin with blank slates. They accrete, they grow incrementally. This is a wonderful photograph of a Gecekondu hillside in Istanbul by the great Baz Princeton. And that is the reality of so much architecture around the world. It doesn't begin with a blank piece of paper and a pure idea. It grows incrementally over time, and it becomes something difficult to categorize, complex. And that is the nature of architecture in the 21st century, I think, is understanding how to work with what's there, to adapt, to build upon. Next slide, please. And I said I would show some cultural buildings. This is Palais de Tokyo by Lacaton and Vassal. And it's hard to imagine now how radical this building was when it opened 21 years ago as a former palace converted into an art gallery, but with such a raw aesthetic, everything stripped back and revealed, impure, really an impure architecture, very much kind of rough, maltreated, but left there exposed. It's become so beautiful, but almost kind of mundane now. We've seen this, it's become part of the culture. Next slide, please. But it was really the beginning of something. And Lacaton and Vassal's great mantra is never demolish. Why would you demolish all that embodied energy, all that embodied carbon, all that, all of that embodied architectural history? It's a crime. And this is another patchwork of a building, Sala Beckett, a rightly celebrated cultural retrofit project by Flores y Prat, Spanish practice. And you can see that retrofit as culture is a culture of seams and transitions and hybridity and pieces fitting together in awkwardly beautiful ways with new life added in to bring those pieces together. Next slide, please. And the Design Museum has a similar origin story. I mean, what we're looking at here is the original building, which was the Commonwealth Institute, a defunct institute. Who wants to talk about Commonwealth and the Commonwealth anymore? And that's in that kind of old colonial sense. And a very strange and kind of wonderful building it was, completely impractical. So born into something new, the roof and envelope retained, but completely rethought internally. Next slide, please. So I work there, and I spend every day in a building that has been retrofitted, if we want to use that term, revived. And it's not just an architectural way of thinking. I mean, this is Helen Kirkham applying kind of hybridity, the Frankensteinian, to sneakers. Next slide, please. Do you know how many sneakers are thrown away every year? We don't want to go into that. Martino Gamper, the 100 Chairs in 100 Days project. What a wonderful set of metaphors for how one can use imagination with what already exists to stitch impossible things together, turn them into something new. And that's the kind of thinking we need. And where I'm going is that, architects aren't necessarily trained to think like this. They're trained on the blank piece of paper. They're trained to create the new. But actually to work with what's there, with the contingent, with the messy reality of what's already there is a whole other way of thinking about architecture. And it's increasingly what we need to do if we're going to build an architecture that never demolishes. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. I was so mesmerised with you talking that every time you said change slide, I was like, changing slide. Thank you so much for that framing. And because of the time, I'm going to suggest that we don't go into a conversation here, but we use the dinner for that. Is anybody burning to say something right this moment? No. Okay, so I wanted to say I want to say thank you so much for your beautiful reflections, because I really, I dare anybody to tell us that our homes, our streets, our neighbourhoods, this idea of retrofit, whichever entry point you want to come at it from, is not this incredible site of imagination, this incredible site for us to renew ourselves as a society, an incredible way or particular or method or means through which we can completely transform our ideas about, the woodlands that we leave to our children, to the work that we did to reimagine how our street spaces were used, the ways in which we think about how we live together, care for one another, think about materials, think about our relationships with one another. And I also dare anyone to tell us that there isn't a very different and very civic and neighborhood and collective way to get there, because this is not just, a small group of people. It isn't just Melissa here or Civic Square in Birmingham, or this is actually, and this festival will show that this is a deep and rich and eclectic and excited and smart and rigorous and practical generation that really has the chance to do something incredibly important and must do it, but that actually together this is at all scales, at all different entry points, at all different ways in which we can bring our skills, whether that's from the inside, whether that's through activism, whether that's through the means of thinking about timber or starting a sharing library or the work that's happening here in Knowle West. We've all got an incredibly important and very serious role to play, and we are very serious actors in this story. And I think that is really, really important. When I was hearing from Mellis about the design code that you were building, the overlaps with the design code that was built here for the homes with the neighbourhood, there's so much in the spaces between us, and the festival is really here to try and unlock and celebrate and give dignity and nobility and rigour and seriousness to every part of that story. Whether you're hosting the panel here today, whether you're activating your street through sharing, whether you're getting to work on the biggest council estate in Europe, that these aren't more or less important. They are important together, and the intersection between those are critical. And in a society and in a world that wants to, number one, divide us, number two, make certain parts of the story more or less important, really push us to stories of where you can extract the most amount of value and finance and profit as quickly as possible. And away from these moments that we get to have tonight, I really just want to urge you to kind of connect and to take a moment to think about what's the conversation you'd love to have over dinner. We'll all be there. We'll all be very spread out, hopefully, across the tables. What is the conversation you want to pick up on? What has stood out for you? What bridge do you want to try and build? What reimagination or reframing has happened for you in your mind? Because I think it's in those blurs and those edges where really, really special things are starting to happen. And that can be both philosophical. This can be like a world-changing moment for you, or it could be in the real practical. I know that after last year's festival, Sara, for example, started collaborating with a bunch of people who had been partners in the festival, and they've already started to do amazing work. Or it can be a world shift for you, and you want to talk to somebody about that. So, or a mindset shift. So I want to say thank you so much to all the panelists. I want to say thank you to Melissa, because Melissa actually curated all this and just made it a dream for me to come and sit here and curate. And on behalf of everyone at Civic Square, we want to say thank you to Knowle West, and particularly to the team who have put on the most marvellous day together. I think we're going to have a huge round of applause for all of that, and I think Melissa's edging to do some practicals, which will be great. But just before she does that, because I know what it's like to be that guy as well, I'm going to say just to sit in that moment and really give a deep appreciation for these folks, but also just for everything that's happened today, because I feel emotional. Because I do think what's happening is really special, and I hope that today has been as enjoyable for you as it has been for all of us. And it's not over. We're going to have a wonderful dinner together, but there's no more big stagey, talky moments. So should we have a huge round of applause for each other and for the panel?